Long before Bridgerton captured imaginations, there was Lady Caroline Lamb, a dazzling and envied figure of high society who became infamous for one of history's most disastrous love affairs. When she met the charismatic Lord Byron, their romance began passionately but spiraled into ruin. After Byron's cruel rejection, Lady Caroline sent him a chilling package that left him horrified and sent shivers down his spine. But more on that soon. As the only daughter of the Earl and Countess of Bessborough, Lady Caroline Lamb seemed destined for a privileged and charmed upbringing. Yet her childhood was far from idyllic. It was marred by a grim series of events from the very start. Born with a frail constitution, Caroline narrowly survived a horrifying illness involving intestinal worms, a trauma that left a lasting mark on her fragile psyche. Despite moments of carefree joy spent frolicking with her many aristocratic cousins, this fleeting innocence soon gave way to darker days. Struggling with the harsh realities of her delicate health, Caroline turned to laudanum, a potent opiate, with reckless fervour. Her shocking dependence on the drug left her parents appalled, prompting them to hire a strict governess solely to monitor their unruly daughter. Perhaps in desperation to curb her wayward behaviour, they hastened her transition into the next stage of her tumultuous life. As Caroline entered her teenage years, she transformed into an extraordinarily beautiful young woman. With her striking looks and a web of powerful family connections, it seemed inevitable that she would secure a brilliant marriage, if only her unpredictable nature could be managed. In 1805, fate intervened, though not in the way anyone might have hoped. Just shy of her 20th birthday, Caroline married the Honourable William Lamb, a promising aristocrat with lofty political ambitions. On the surface, the match appeared ideal, and to sweeten the deal, it was a rare love match. The couple shared a genuine affection for one another. But this was far from a storybook romance. Beneath the glittering surface of their union, trouble was brewing, and Caroline's wild spirit would soon come crashing against the rigid expectations of her new life. William's mother, Elizabeth, had been instrumental in orchestrating the seemingly perfect match, but beneath her polished exterior, she harboured a deep disdain for both Caroline and her mother. Despite pushing for the union, Elizabeth viewed Caroline as little more than a pawn in her plans, a dynamic that would plague the young bride throughout her marriage. Initially, Caroline and William's union showed great promise, much like the vibrant young woman herself. However, the honeymoon phase was tragically short-lived. Shortly after their wedding, Caroline became pregnant, offering a glimmer of hope for a bright future. But heartbreak soon followed when the child was stillborn. At just 20 years old, Caroline was thrust into a devastating spiral of grief. As if the loss of her child wasn't enough, this tragedy marked the beginning of a darker chapter in her life, one filled with heartbreak and turmoil. At this point in their marriage, William and Caroline were still devoted to each other, determined to build a family despite mounting challenges. However, one ominous issue loomed. Caroline's frail health made pregnancy and childbirth incredibly taxing on her body. Each attempt left her physically drained, requiring significant time to recover. In 1807, their perseverance paid off with the birth of a living son, George, bringing a moment of joy and hope. But this triumph was followed by heartbreak in 1809 when Caroline delivered a premature daughter who did not survive. The toll on Caroline was immense. Her once vibrant health was ravaged, and the cracks in her and William's seemingly solid foundation began to deepen. This period marked the unraveling of their happiness, as Caroline's struggles and the tragedies they endured started to erode their bond. Caroline's son, George, may have survived infancy, but life with him came with its own set of challenges. It quickly became evident that George was severely mentally handicapped. In a time when sending such children to sanatoriums was the norm, Caroline defied societal expectations and chose to care for him at home, bringing an unusual warmth and humanity to her role as a mother. However, this loving decision came at a steep cost. Caroline, still a young woman, found herself carrying burdens that seemed more fitting for someone twice her age. Between the emotional and physical toll of her son's condition, her own fragile health, and the pressures of her husband William's rising political career, she began to feel isolated within her marriage. And just when life seemed overwhelming enough, Caroline's in-laws made everything worse. Her overbearing and critical mother-in-law Elizabeth used every opportunity to undermine her, further deepening Caroline's sense of alienation and setting the stage for even darker days ahead. After a few years of marriage, Caroline's relationship with her mother-in-law Elizabeth hadn't improved. In fact, it had deteriorated significantly. Elizabeth's disdain only deepened, and her children followed suit. William's siblings openly mocked Caroline, cruelly dubbing her the little beast. The hostility she faced at every turn made her life increasingly unbearable, but the worst was yet to come. By 1812, Caroline had reached her breaking point. At 26 years old, disillusioned with her marriage and deeply frustrated by her stifling life, she was poised to rebel in spectacular fashion. And that spring, fate handed her the perfect opportunity. It was at an event that Caroline first crossed paths with the infamous poet Lord Byron. Known for his brooding good looks, razor-sharp wit, and endless string of romantic conquests, Byron was already a sensation in English society. But when his gaze met Caroline's, it was electric, and their connection would spark a scandal that would leave the social elite reeling. Reportedly, Byron was instantly captivated by Caroline, while she initially played it cool, dismissing his advances. In fact, this was supposedly when she coined the infamous phrase, calling him mad, bad, and dangerous to know, an epithet that would forever be associated with the notorious poet. Yet, despite her initial indifference, Caroline's resolve didn't last long. From the outset, their relationship was a tempestuous game. Despite the blatant evidence of their entanglement, gossip ran rampant, and the sparks between them were obvious to anyone paying attention. They both delighted in mocking and criticizing each other in public. Behind closed doors, however, they were inseparable, indulging in their passionate yet reckless liaison. As their affair intensified, so did the drama. It was clear to everyone that Byron and Caroline's connection was as toxic as it was consuming, and soon their fiery romance reached a breaking point. Within weeks of their first meeting, Byron and Caroline were spiraling into a reckless and dangerous affair. At one particularly desperate moment, Caroline even broke into Byron's rooms and begged him to elope with her. Byron, equally infatuated and impulsive, almost agreed. Only the intervention of a cooler-headed friend, likely reminding him that Caroline was very much a married woman, stopped him from making an irreparable mistake. But there were darker forces at play. In a cruel twist of fate, Byron was close friends with Caroline's formidable mother-in-law, Elizabeth Lamb. If rumours of the scandalous affair hadn't already reached Elizabeth through society's ever-busy grapevine, Byron himself might have let it slip. Predictably, Elizabeth was outraged and began scheming to destroy Caroline's reputation and, if possible, her marriage. Elizabeth didn't waste time. She launched a whisper campaign, spreading rumours about Caroline's indiscretions to anyone who would listen, including her son, William Lamb. However, Elizabeth's efforts initially backfired. While William was deeply unhappy with his wife's behaviour, he wasn't ready to abandon her entirely. Frustrated but undeterred, Elizabeth continued her crusade, driven by more than just maternal concern. To be sure, Elizabeth despised Caroline's flagrant infidelity, yet there was more to her disdain. Unlike her daughter-in-law, Elizabeth had engaged in her own share of extramarital affairs during her youth, but she prided herself on her discretion. Her liaisons were carefully managed, involving only the most powerful men, and conducted in a way that preserved her public image. Caroline, on the other hand, had no such restraint. Her passionate and very public affair with Byron was a stark contrast to Elizabeth's calculated secrets, and it was this lack of moderation that set the stage for the catastrophic events to come. Byron and Caroline's affair blazed with intensity, but burned out almost as quickly as it began. By August 1812, Barely 6 months after their whirlwind romance ignited, Byron had grown weary of the drama and called it off. For Caroline, the breakup was earth-shattering. Desperate to make sense of her shattered world, she sought answers, but what she uncovered only deepened the wound. While Caroline had poured her heart into their affair, Byron had been keeping some cold, hard truths from her. Far from being a romantic escapade, his relationship with Caroline had been more of a diversion. Behind the scenes, Byron was drowning in debt and actively searching for a wealthy bride to secure his financial future. In short, Caroline was never part of his long-term plan. She was left not only heartbroken, but also socially tarnished. In the rigid society of the time, a woman scorned was a woman ruined. While Byron emerged relatively unscathed, his reputation as a rakish poet intact, Caroline became the target of scorn and gossip. In an attempt to shield her from the fallout, Caroline's husband William stepped in. Despite their strained marriage, he arranged for her to retreat to Ireland, hoping the quiet countryside would help her heal and escape the public eye. It was a kind gesture, but it proved disastrous. Far from bringing peace, the move only exacerbated Caroline's emotional turmoil. The stage was set for even more chaos to unfold. You see, Caroline, consumed by heartbreak and longing, made the classic mistake of a lovesick ex. She reopened the lines of communication with Lord Byron while in Ireland. Unable to let go of her feelings, she wrote to him, pouring her heart into her letters. In an infuriatingly familiar move, Byron, ever the unserious man, responded in kind, sending his own flurry of messages. His replies were enough to reignite Caroline's fragile hope that their tumultuous affair might rekindle. It was a dangerous game, and Caroline was playing with fire. After months apart, Caroline returned to London in 1813, but time had done nothing to dull her obsession with Byron. Despite being gaunt and frail from the stress of their split, she sought him out, desperate for reconciliation. Byron's response, however, crushed her. He made it abundantly clear that their affair was over, and delivered the blow with calculated cruelty. Adding insult to injury, Caroline soon discovered that Byron hadn't been mourning their relationship at all. While she had been wasting away from heartbreak, Byron had been entertaining other lovers, including Jane Harley, Countess of Oxford. The Countess, a skilled seductress 14 years his senior, only highlighted Caroline's growing sense of humiliation. Still, Caroline refused to let go, and her persistence spiraled into disaster. Byron's treatment of her turned openly vicious. He began publicly and privately mocking her, showing no restraint in his disdain. In one particularly nasty quip to Elizabeth Lamb, Caroline's own mother-in-law, he cruelly remarked that he was being haunted by a skeleton, a jab at Caroline's emaciated state. But Byron's cruelty didn't stop there. It was only the beginning of an increasingly ugly fallout. Caroline's obsession reached a catastrophic climax after hearing Byron's cruel insult. At a soirée, surrounded by high society guests, she grabbed a glass and attempted to slash her wrists in a dramatic act of despair. Rather than expressing concern, Byron callously mocked her, sneering, "Lady Caroline performed the dagger scene." This humiliating episode was only the start of her downward spiral. Determined to win him back, or at least force him to acknowledge her, Caroline escalated her tactics. She began stalking Byron, disguising herself in elaborate costumes, including dressing as a page boy, to sneak into his house unnoticed. When these attempts failed, she descended into even more desperate and unsettling behaviour, solidifying her reputation as a scandalous, unhinged figure in London's elite circles. In 1815, Caroline received devastating news. Byron had proposed to the wealthy heiress Annabella Milbank, and she had reluctantly agreed to marry him, despite serious doubts about his character. However, the union was doomed from the start. And within a year, Annabella fled the marriage, taking their infant daughter with her. The split was explosive, fueled by Byron's ongoing financial troubles and disturbing rumours of an affair with his own half-sister. For once, Byron faced the consequences of his scandalous behaviour. Shunned by society, his reputation crumbled, and he was forced to flee England in disgrace. But as Byron's life unravelled, Caroline found her own twisted satisfaction. After years of humiliation, she finally saw her former lover brought low, proving that karma, like heartbreak, has its own way of coming full circle. Caroline's desires and passions burned too brightly for the restrained conventions of the 19th century. Her mental struggles, though misunderstood and unfairly criticized in a world that demanded women be nothing more than graceful and demure, didn't excuse her most unsettling act. At the height of her anguish over Lord Byron pulling away, Caroline conceived an idea for a token of love that veered into the truly bizarre. Desperate to leave an unforgettable mark on Byron, she decided to send him a gift. But this wasn't a typical lock of golden hair tied with a ribbon. Instead, Caroline clipped hair from a much more intimate part of her body, included it with a heartfelt note, and sent it off. To make matters worse, the clippings were bloody, adding a grotesque layer to her already shocking gesture. This unsettling gift was likely the final straw for Byron, marking the point where even he began to pull back from their tempestuous and doomed connection.